Catus, Maximus here, this time with a pocket camera teardown. This is an ancient Polaroid, like, you know, this thing's like 12 years old or something. i835, 8 megapixel camera. Always annoyed me about digital cameras is they always had their proprietary little cables to interface them with. This one actually still does work after all these years. Video resolution is not great. 3 times optical zoom. Not a lot else to say. Besides, I did like, even though it was old, proprietary USB connector, but it did take the SD cards and does run off of AA batteries. They don't last particularly long, at least they're quick and easy to replace. Anyway, I like doing these teardown videos. Some of my subscribers or viewers do like it, obviously. Not all of them. But it's just neat because because cameras tend to have just some pretty complicated little mechanisms and little motors and gears because of the way they pack everything in. So I always kind of like taking them apart. Anyway, let's start disassembling this one. There indeed was a screw under that sticker at the bottom. We'll get those screws out of here. That one, couple on the side here, and a couple on the other side. And now I've never really been able to put one of these back together. Actually, I've never tried, but it's just kind of the exercise. I like taking this kind of stuff apart, not just because of the neat little mechanisms, but it's kind of a form of training. As you take apart more stuff, you kind of just get a feel on how things want to come apart. And when you're forcing things, kind of have an idea of the assembly procedures of a variety of products. So if you just take apart random things like these little $5 outdated cameras, it just gives you a lot of skills and experience. So that was actually a little easier than I expected. At least the bottom part wants to come open. There we go. There were a couple little clips, but just able to pull those forward. There's a window in front of the screen, so surprisingly enough, if this camera was more recent, I should say, then you'd be able to pull this off and even potentially clean the screen or get any particles out from behind the screen, or that are on the screen in between the plastic and the screen. In this instance, the screen itself is actually clipped into this little metal frame, and then it just has a simple little one of those little flip type connectors. You just use a small slot head, flip that little lever up that releases tension so we can pop it out. And for anybody who wants to know, there's the part number on that screen. And now we can get access to the screws that are holding on this metal plate. Just a couple. They are a different color. They are black. When you do work on this stuff, you really want to have high quality screwdrivers. Lower quality drivers just won't have quite the right shape of Phillips, and all these are just really tiny Phillips, and they're basically impossible to remove if you strip them out, which is always unfortunate. There's our little metal underplate. Here's our camera module. We've got some protective film here, I assume to prevent the plate itself. Sometimes I keep it. This is sticky, so I may not keep this, but sometimes that stuff is handy to keep. But yeah, this film here is just so if you put some pressure on the case, that metal frame does not cause an issue and short anything out on the back of the camera. This camera did have a degree of built-in memory, as well as taking a memory card. And I guess it's kind of debatable whether that's really a useful feature, but I kind of like it when manufacturers do that. Here we had another flip connector, but it had a bunch of, foam or something on there that I had to pull off. This was one of the ones where you have this clip that you kind of pull out a little bit. I completely broke it off, but I think that's okay. I'm not so worried about getting this antique camera. Now, this isn't particularly dense or heavy. It's not a particularly nice one. It only has like a 3 times optical zoom. This is where things get a little funky just because this board does not want to just pop out real easily. So I gotta figure that out. What I find interesting is there's actually a surprising amount of hand soldering. It has a microphone for its little video camera mode, hand soldered. And then like for the flash, you can see it's hand soldered up here, but like just huge globs. It was actually a terrible soldering job. Really surprised. It was a lighter weight, cheaper Polaroid, but nonetheless, I mean, those are dangerously close from actually touching each other. It's just really pretty surprising. Was able to start this outer frame, peeling it up from there, and then was able to work its way out from around the edge. You can see we have another screw right there hiding. And that's always the venture. It's just like a little puzzle, you know. It's like doing complicated auto repairs or anything like that. You've got to, especially when you don't have like a service manuals, you just got to figure out, you know, the magical design puzzle of taking these things apart. I mean, and they're not easy to put back together either, I'm sure, or assemble just even at the factory. I guess once you're used to it, it's okay, but nonetheless, really still doesn't want to come out. It seems like there's this whole black subframe that's holding it all together. So we'll search around for more screws. There's one little screw hiding down in here. It's only accessible when you slide the battery cover over. And I didn't do it. We have another one that's up here in the corner. Just a weird, magical little puzzle. I don't think I got all of them out. Let me hunt around some more. Since these are hand soldered wires, I'm going to go ahead and cut those. Cut these off. Those are the flash wires. We have a little tiny speaker. There we go. It is a puzzle. What I believe is actually holding this on is the battery terminals themselves are inside this black subframe. Then they assemble it, put on the board, do all this hand soldering, and they actually hand solder the battery terminals. And I believe that literally is what is holding this together, is indeed the battery terminals, the soldered battery terminals themselves. That took a minute to figure out, but yep, that was exactly what was going on. Part of the puzzle is you actually have to desolder the battery terminals to actually get the motherboard off. And there's our motherboard. Quite a bit of components on there just for a little digital camera. There's our capacitors for the flash. Those are always kind of neat to save and keep a hold of for various electronic projects. Now we still can't get this frame out. Just wanted to tear that off so we can get a better look. There's all sorts of little chips. That little chip, little Maximus chip there, whatever that sharp chip is. This must be the processor for it. And then that must be, come on camera, that must be the RAM for it. And then that's the additional flash memory. A lot of little circuits on there. Anyway, let's get into the last part of this. I think I found the other screw that's holding this mid frame in right here. I do save all these little screws because if I do ever take apart a device like this, then at least I have, there's yet another screw. I just have a huge variety of just all these different random screws, because these are the type of screws that if you lose, you know, it's just impossible for you to really try to order the right screws. So if you just save, if you take apart this stuff periodically and save all the screws, then you have a nice little collection. The thing that flew out was the little two top buttons and a little power LED light. That's the two-stage, that's the power button. And that's the, I don't know if that's a two-position button there, the one for taking the photograph. I think it's just a normal single position. Slightly better cameras, and which is a standard in most cameras, is you partially press the photograph button and it focuses, and then you press it all the way and it actually takes the picture. So anyway, there's the other half of the case. Now the little battery cover will fall out, and all we have left is really the lens assembly. This is an autofocus, we know, because what we have is we have one motor here for the zoom, and we have a second motor here for the focus. There's our flash capacitor, 120 microfarads at 330 volts, some type of microscopic little pin there. And now let's see if we can't get this lens assembly out. I think it's just a couple of screws, one here and one down here. Indeed, I was correct. There's the lens assembly, the most interesting part. And then there's our mid frame. Has a little speaker in it, has the flash in it, battery terminals, not a lot else. Let's see how badly I can butcher this. I'm just going to start taking out screws. Got a little one up there. These are the most complicated assemblies to get apart here. We have another one on the side, and we have all these terminals here because it's also the CCD arrays in there. Just a ton of engineering that goes into these things. It's really surprises me every time. That's why I find, once again, why I find it so interesting. This will be the CCD array on the back here. Those are some tiny little screws, and it just pops out that easy. There's the 8 megapixel CCD. Version 4, November 22nd, 2007. That makes this thing 15 years old. Alright, suppose we'll continue to shred this unit here. Truly microscopic screws. I periodically clean up the screws so that I don't... I'm clumsy, and so I'll inevitably brush my hand across the pile of microscopic screws. They'll end up on the floor, and they'll step on them, and they're not fun to step on, that's for sure. There's little screws everywhere. There's a tiny one holding in the motor down there. I mean, that thing, that is a tiny little screw. That's for sure. And, whoops, the screws for holding on the back plate here. And get that done. See if I have any others. Pop the back plate off. Something that seemed a little bit odd is there's like a secondary lens up here. I'm not sure what that's about, but the motor that extends the lens is this one, and it actually goes through kind of a complicated gear train to power this little gear over here so that it can rotate this around and make it extend out. Actually just turned it over, and this piece just fell out. And this may be something where that may be associated with this. This is actually a little sensor right there. Just notice that this little gear wants to pop out, and I may be able to kind of force it to start to extend, which I am able to do, which is pretty cool. And now that I've got it extended a little bit, you can see that this is a floating lens. Once it all expands, and this lens is actually just on a little spring and worm gear. So as this motor goes in and out, it moves this lens back and forth, and that's how it's doing the autofocus. Actually, it's not a spring, it's just a worm gear. And that has 4 poles, so that's going to be one tiny little stepper motor. Super tiny. Surprising amount of end play. That would harm autofocus having that much end play in there. Although it probably works just fine. So then, no, there was a spring. There's a spring right here. That's what's maintaining tension on there. Something in here that I'm not understanding is it has this lens, but this thing's like spring loaded and can change position. So what I thought was a second lens is really just one that, it must be as it extends out that this lens actually goes up to make space for it to crunch down, and then as it extends out enough, it's able to drop down and become part of the proper optical train. And so it just looked weird when it was all squished together, and that was just one of the techniques they did to move parts out of the way so they could get all sucked into the camera. There's a little cover right here. Just pop that off. And where's that other gear so I can put that in here properly? There we go. But as far as what extends it out, you have this worm gear, and it goes to this wild gear train. The worm gear to this gear to this gear. I mean, there's a bunch from here to this gear, this gear, this gear, this gear, and this gear, just so they can make it compact and have the motor be over here and then transfer the power all the way around. Kind of complicated. See if I can't knock all those little gears out. It is aware of how much this motor is turning because there's this little window here, or these little wings, and they pass through a sensor letting it know how much it's rotating. And as far as the zoom, it gets out to its normal. When it zooms, it just changes that position there. Blop, blop. And there's the empty shell. Here's our little worm gear. Now this is just a brushed DC motor. Nothing too special about this one. Pull that off. Show the little gear train that was connected to. Those are all the little gears. A whole bunch of them. And it shot off, and somehow I managed to keep it. But somehow inside there was this, which is, I mean, that is an absolutely microscopic little spring. One of the smallest springs I've ever seen. And for completeness, I'm going to do what I can to maybe take apart the rest of this. Although I'm not entirely sure. There is yet some other kind of sensor or something in there that may just tell it when it's open or closed. It wasn't a sensor, it's actually the shutter that's in there. So we finally, that just clips in. See, there's the spiral tracks that they have inside. This is the final lens here. And there's just a little lever. There you can see it. This little lever right here. That just gets actuated. It's spring loaded to open, but when it closes, that's all it's doing is just closing the little protector there. And then this here, that is actually the shutter. Pull out a couple more screws. To tell you the truth, the only time you'd run the screws that are smaller is probably inside watches. Now let's see if I can't get this little assembly out of here. I can. I'm not exactly sure what this is. Some kind of swing arm thing. And then there is the shutter itself, which actually had 4 screws holding on the plate, yet there's another screw right here, which is actually surprisingly stiff. I think that one may have had some thread locker on it. See if I can't peel this up. I don't think anybody stuck around quite this long in the video, but if you have, a lot of these devices will have like little clippies like this that hold stuff together, and you need something real sharp like this right here, a pick, in order to release those little clippies. My pick is not in the greatest of condition. There we go. Now we can actually take apart the shutter assembly. Shutters are made out of very thin, I don't know if it's graphite paper, but it's very opaque. It doesn't let any light through. But they're just made to be magnificently lightweight so that they can open and close very, very quickly. We have all sorts of little layers in here. I'm just trying to figure out what exactly is actuating it. There, finally got that assembly down. And so we just have a little coil, 2 coils, so maybe it's activating either it's partially open or all the way open. I'm not exactly sure why there's 2 coils, but that's it. Ultimately what's doing is just a little pulse to a solenoid, a little electromagnet. Actually this, take that back, that is a motor. This is a solenoid that's just moving this. Actually, that may be a motor too. Yeah, it is. There's actually a tiny little rotor there. The electromagnet actually goes into this metal fork, and there's a little rotor in there. If I can't get this thing out of here. Yep, a little DC motor. You can see that both of these, where'd my other, I lost my other rotor. Oh well, it's so tiny. So surprisingly enough, it's like a little motor, a little electromagnet. So what happens is this little fork here, this isn't actually spinning all the way around, it's just, this induces a magnetic field in the fork, and then it causes this to want to orientate itself a little way. So it is like a motor because it's rotating something versus just a solenoid, which is moving something back and forth. And the side, oh, we can even pull off the coil wire. There's our tiny little coil wire. This wire right here, I mean, that stuff is probably, that wire has got to be 1/1000th of an inch thick at most. Actually, it's like 2/1000ths of an inch thick. It's a little thicker than I thought. Anyway, that's all the parts that were just inside the lens assembly itself. And I think it's just fascinating. That's why I like taking apart this stuff, is just because, I mean, it's an achievement in engineering and assembly to make a mechanical system this small and actually be relatively reliable. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody who's been watching and subscribing and even sticks through some of these weird teardown videos. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.